So, today's video is another episode of Animal's True Rock and Roll Stories. And I was thinking to myself of all the things that is rock and roll that's developed and molded my life into the life that it is. What's the most rock and roll story of all? And the only thing that comes to mind is, how did I get into playing music as something more than what other people normally do? And it always takes me back to the one thing, the only thing that set me on the path. And that would be how I started to learn how to play guitar and everything that led up to that, which would eventually lead up to me forming Creepshow with two of the most important influences on that. I'll get to that later. This episode is how I became a rock and roll superstar and learned to stop worrying and love being a mariachi. Let's go back 1989. I am a relatively forgettable person as far as anything I've done to that point. I'm a sophomore in high school, Highlands High School, San Antonio, Texas. And I'm going on the worst path you could think of. I'm a drug dealer, and I'm involved in a lot of criminal enterprises. And I didn't have a lot of hope for where I was going. The turning point was when I got arrested for a piddly shoplifting charge. And on my mother's birthday. That left a very indelible and unhealable scar. Not only on myself, but on my mom. I knew at that point that if I was going to be anything to anyone, I needed to change the course of my life. And at this point, I had heard that there was a program at Highlands. It's a folk music program. I didn't know anything about playing any kind of instrument, and I needed a way out of the life that I had started to build for myself, which is going nowhere. And I made it my mission after my arrest to get into this program no matter what. And the reason I wanted to get into it, because I felt in my heart of hearts that music was the only thing that was going to salvage what was left of my soul. And when I found out who was teaching the program, I would go. I'm not going to use any names because, out of respect for the dead. But I will say, I will chronicle the events, even if I don't tell you who they were. You'll get the idea. I went to the instructor who was leading the program at Highlands High School. This was in 1989. And I went to her and I begged her to allow me to come into the program in the middle of semester 1 and semester 2. Semester 1 was fall, semester 2 was spring. There's usually some leeway for students to go into different programs. At least at the time there was. Oh, pardon me. And I desperately wanted to get into this program, which was a folk music program. They were teaching mariachi music. And I figured any way to learn how to play guitar was a means to an end, which would lead me to be putting a band together and becoming a rock and roll star. Well, I kept going day after day after day, being rejected by this instructor, and she would not allow me into the class. And it was close to the end of the second semester of into the first semester of fall 1989. And I was begging her, please let me into this class. And she told me no. And the reason she gave was that my reputation as a thug, as a piece of shit drug dealer, had preceded me. And I was devastated. But it happened that on that day, the person who was the program leader throughout the district of SASC, his name is John Ortiz. He happened to be there that day. And he saw the exchange between me and the instructor at Highlands. And he wanted to know what was up. He came up to me and asked me what was going on. And I told him this was my last chance for any kind of redemption. And I didn't think that if she didn't allow me into the program, my end was pretty... I knew what was coming. So Juan Ortiz went to the instructor and he told her, you're going to let him in regardless of how you feel about it. And if you don't, I'm pulling my support for the program at this school. That was the first time in my entire life that anyone had gone to bat for me. And I don't think it's been repeated since. When she was told that, one of these came to me and said, "All right, no problem, you're in. Don't let me down." And so she basically took me, two other students, one of them who is going to become of extreme importance to my later life, and she stuck us she stuck us in a closet and told us, gave us some sheet music and said, "Learn this, otherwise you're not going to pass the class. And if you don't pass the class, you're going to get booted out, and that's it, you're done." The other person's was another guy, I cannot remember his name. I just remember calling him, I don't even remember what I called him. This weird Chonko, I think, something like that. The other guy, the most important addition to the equation, was a guy named Pedro Apolinar. And he ended up becoming a very important part of the band that basically defined my existence for over 10 years. Where you're stuck in a closet, forced to learn how to play certain songs without any instruction. That was the instructor's way of sabotaging what Juan Ortiz had said to us. But I didn't care, because at least it gave me a foot in the door, and I progressed. I shoved my entire leg into the fucking door, because I was going to be goddamned if any person in the universe was going to allow me or keep me from what I wanted. And that was to learn how to play guitar. And this bitch of an instructor wanted to keep that from me. And I was going to be goddamned if anyone would keep that kind of instruction from me. So, moving on. There was a mandatory performance that was expected in, I want to say it was February or March of that year. I had only been playing for maybe a month and a half at that point. And at once we were given the directive oh, you're playing at this showcase. And if you don't do well, guess what? You're out of the class. No pressure, right? Anyway, we do this show. It's at the San Antonio Hemisphere Plaza. And what I didn't realize at the time was that mariachi groups from different high schools from all over Texas were being invited to perform at this specific gig. We played the performance. We played, I think, 3 songs, I'm sorry. 3 songs and then 1 song with everyone involved. And it was awesome. And we were given 2nd All-State in 1989. San Antonio Hemisphere Arena. And it was the most meaningful thing I have ever done in my life. I met Alfred John Robles and Pedro Apolinar formally there. And we became friends, which would later lead on to our involvement in John Hex's Creep Show, which I will touch on later. But this is how everything came together. And without that, I wouldn't have become who I am now. My parents showed up to that show and they saw me perform, which is something I never expected. It gave me something to believe in when I realized they were there. Other than that, that's the genesis of what I eventually became. And so knowing that, will give you the blueprints for what I would eventually go on to do. And I'm good with that. I feel like some people will come out and say contradictory things. That's where I was. I experienced it. And no one else will take that from me. That was the building blocks for what I would eventually become. And I think that's enough for anyone to tell you this is who I was, and this will lead to who I am. I hope you enjoyed this. If you didn't, fine. This is more for me than anyone else. I'll catch you on the flip side and give you part 2 shortly after. Talk to you soon. Later, Gator.